Welcome, I'm Joyce Ross. In this video on inspirational authorship, we will study Golden Writing Key number 6, part 1, which is include conflict, tension, and suspense. Though it's easy to understand why fictional prose such as mystery and romance novels always include conflict, suspense, and tension, some newer writers might question why an inspirational story should also include this trio of intrigue. The answer is to hold a reader's interest. No matter the genre, without this trio of intrigue, a story becomes predictable, even boring. Have you ever skipped to the last chapter of a book to see how it ends? Most likely, if you have, you never did so again. Knowing how a story ends takes the fun out of reading it. When you know the resolution to a conflict, there's no suspense and therefore no tension. The desire for conflict, suspense, and tension is why sports fans who've recorded a game to watch later ask friends who watch the game at the scheduled time not to tell them how the score. If you know which team won before the game ends, the conflict is gone. Therefore, there's no suspense, hence no tension. Minus the emotional ride, the game becomes boring. Some how-to books are the exception to this trio of intrigue guideline. These books hold a reader's interest in other ways. Cookbooks, for instance, use colorful pictures to heighten a reader's anticipation of a delicious meal. Even the most basic instructional book contains drawings or black and white photos. Obviously, wanting to know how to do something is the primary reason someone buys and reads a how-to book. Readers aren't looking for a great read, they want information. Though the highlights of a famous person's life might be common knowledge, his or her memoir will contain accounts of events, circumstances, and relationships that the public doesn't know about. Stories about each person, event, or circumstance and how it affected the famous person's life, that's conflict, will elicit emotional responses in the readers, that's tension, as they anticipate the outcome, that's suspense. Aware that stories are what readers remember most, authors of books about sales, motivation, and business use story examples to help readers retain information. Transformational books are loaded with stories for the same reason. Stories make learning interesting, and the lessons contained within memorable. The more conflict, tension, and suspense, the more memorable the story, and hence a reader's knowledge retention. People who read inspirational books are looking for hope and insights. However, they also want an interesting read. They will find your inspirational story interesting when it contains scenes that allow them to visualize and imagine what the central character, you, experienced and felt. Readers will find your story interesting when your narrative contains conflict, suspense, and tension. What might be surprising for some inspirational writers is that readers want to root for you in the same way they root for a hero or heroine in a fictional story. Why? Because as the hero or heroine of your personal journey, when you triumph, it gives readers hope that they can triumph too. By including conflict, suspense, and tension, you provide the opportunity for a reader to root for you, thereby providing an opportunity for him or her to root for himself or herself. Let's break this trio of intrigue down, beginning with conflict. Conflict is the obstacle in a story that the hero or heroine wants or needs to overcome. Suspense is the inherent uncertainty when there is more than one possible outcome to a conflict. Tension refers to the emotions reading a suspenseful story elicits in readers. For instance, anticipation, agitation, excitement, amusement, nervousness, fear, etc. Identifying the primary conflict in an inspirational story is easy. It's an unfortunate circumstance, such as depression, bankruptcy, betrayal, or an unfortunate event, such as a divorce, illness, or the death of a loved one. There might also be secondary conflict within your story. For instance, friction within a relationship you recount. Stumbling blocks, setbacks, and challenges are also forms of conflict. If you needed to find the funds to take a course that you felt would help you heal, the conflict was that you needed to secure the money. If your inspirational story includes a scene or narrative about how you fretted about telling your children that you were divorcing their father, the conflict was figuring out how to deliver your news in the least damaging way. Any inner voices that kept you locked in shame, doubt, regret, or worry are forms of internal conflict. Tension and suspense are created in a story by not immediately revealing the outcome of a conflict. Let's take a look at the conflict, suspense, and tension in Katharine Fahlman's chapter in Heart, Mind, Wisdom Collection number 1. It's titled Bankrupt, What I Learned About Life. Katharine, my husband said, a catch in his voice. Whatever Dwayne was about to say, intuition told me that I wasn't going to like it. I'm listening, I answered, leaving the floor his. I need you to come to the bank with me and sign some forms. Mostly my husband was a strong and proud man. At that moment, he seemed more lost. Okay, I agreed, not bothering to ask what kind of forms. Banks lent people money. We obviously needed a quick cash influx. What time, I asked, sensing his deep sadness and not mentioning the lone tear edging his clouded brown eyes. Protective instincts kicking in, I momentarily considered closing the distance between us and hugging him. But I knew my husband well enough to know what he needed was space. 10 tomorrow morning, he supplied, lowering his head as he turned and exited the room. From her title and story opening, readers will realize that Katharine and her husband Dwayne are in financial trouble. This is conflict. By seeking a bank loan, readers will surmise that the couple is likely trying to avoid bankruptcy. This creates tension and suspense because there's more than one possible outcome. Readers will wonder if Katharine and Dwayne will secure the loan and what will happen if they don't. Though they won't likely realize it this early in the story, because most people relate to times when they needed help, readers will begin to root for Katharine and Dwayne. Let's move on to our next paragraph where Katharine builds even more suspense and conflict. Your debt to asset ratio has greatly affected your credit rating, the loans officer said, his expression sober as his shoulders squared off with Dwayne. Quite frankly, we can't grant you a consolidation loan because we aren't confident that you'll be able to fulfill your payment obligations. We wouldn't be able to fulfill our payment obligations? Did I hear him correctly? Nervously reaching for the papers, I studied our bleak financial picture. There must be some mistake, I said aloud, inwardly realizing that there wasn't. My husband hadn't revealed all the facts and figures before our appointment. Nevertheless, I knew our financial situation wasn't ideal. Turning to face me, the loans officer said, "There's no mistake. I completed your financial profile myself. It's accurate." "Excuse me," I muttered, standing and heading for the office door. Things like this happen to other people, not us. Deafened by the hysterical trample of inner screams, I'm not certain if either the loans officer or my husband responded. Like 1,000 horses stampeding, the clatter of hoofbeat after hoofbeat pounded against my temples as the room teetered and my face flushed red hot. Although readers now know that Katharine and Dwayne aren't likely to secure a loan, because Katharine is shocked by the severity of the couple's financial situation, readers might wonder whether one of the things Katharine learned about life is that she would be better off without her husband. This is suspense. The tension or feelings created within a reader will largely depend on his or her own attitudes toward money, debt, and divorce. Katharine Fahlman's chapter is about much more than bankruptcy. Her story also offers insights on how to move away from berating or blaming yourself or others for any missteps so that you can heal and move forward. Katharine's insights are unique, helpful, and heartwarming. I hope you get a chance to read Bankruptcy, What I Learned About Life in Heart, Mind, Wisdom Collection number 1. Let's now compare Katharine's story to a narrative that contains conflict, but little or no tension and suspense. In this fabricated story, I'll keep the title the same, Bankrupt, What I Learned About Life. One day my husband came home from work and announced that he needed me to go to the bank and sign some papers. Aware that our finances weren't ideal, I knew that he wanted me to sign for a bank loan. I did as he requested, but we didn't secure a loan. The bank manager said that our debt-to-asset ratio indicated we might not be able to make the payments. Shocked that we were in such dire financial circumstances, I had to dash out of the room. I loved my husband dearly. Though we didn't get the bank loan and had to declare bankruptcy, we stayed happily married. In this fabricated story, the conflict is obvious. This husband and wife are experiencing financial difficulties. However, there's no tension. Though readers may still be curious as to what the author learned about life through bankruptcy, which is suspense, readers aren't being drawn into the story in a way that makes them want to root for the couple. It's a lackluster narrative, not a page-turner. To clarify, a narrative or scene about a conflict does not need to be written in a somber tone to create suspense and tension. Let's look at another example. Here's the opening from Marcus Dwayne Harris's story in Heart, Mind, Wisdom number 1. It's titled Social Laryngitis. "Do you want to live with me or your dad?" Mom asked, stroking my 6-year-old directionless mop of black hair that she teased had a mind of its own. Whenever she said it, I always wondered what my hair was thinking. Maybe it could help me make a decision today. Maybe hair was smart. "Think about it while you eat your breakfast," she said, giving up on getting an immediate answer out of me. She was used to me taking time to consult my hair before I answered. But even my hair wasn't smart enough to figure out how to make Mom and Dad get along. Eyes wide to the ceiling and the blankets tucked tight to my neck, fight after fight, I'd heard her threats to leave him. But in the morning, with my father off to work, there was always sugared porridge and reassuring smiles. Today, there was cornflakes served atop a makeshift cardboard table that was the caboose to dozens of boxes forming a trackless train. Some were double-deckers, others stacked so high they begged to be climbed. Maybe from the top I could see into my friend's house. "Marcus, have you decided?" Mom wanted to know, not even noticing that my cereal was soggy. I wasn't hungry. Trying not to cry was making my throat hurt like bees had flown in while I was sleeping and they'd just woken up. Would they build a nest and choke me to death? Though his tone is light, almost whimsical, Marcus has created suspense. Readers will want to know if he will choose to live with his mom or his dad. Continuing the same tone, Marcus then leads into the main conflict of his story. How learning to keep quiet in a bid to always be nice cost him his own happiness. Let's take a look. Scrunching down so that our faces were so close it was as though I were peering into a mirror, she smiled in an "I've got a secret" kind of way. I knew she was going to tell me something good, but all I could think was that everyone said I had her eyes, but her eyes were prettier. I promised to stop at every McDonald's on the way. Every McDonald's? I double-checked as my ears sprung open. Still, I was torn. Dad was grumpy almost always. Mom was nice almost always. But I worried about my father living by himself in our big lonely house. With no one to yell at, would he cry all the time? No, he wouldn't cry. He was too grumpy to cry. Yes, every McDonald's, Mom said, smiling really wide because she knew she'd outsmarted Dad. It was an impressionable lesson. Nice Mom left grumpy Dad. Survival of the nicest was not only logical, it was paramount. When you habitually please people, life is full of warmth and love. When you're demanding and grumpy, you get left behind and alone with no one caring if you bellowed until the sky collapsed. Every reader will identify with Marcus's message that making your own desires and needs known is crucial to one's happiness and success. I hope you get a chance to read Social Laryngitis in Heart, Mind, Wisdom Collection number 1. Creating suspense and tension doesn't mean that a story cannot begin with an outcome. Roswyn Nelson began her chapter, Lonely Choices, with a narrative about her ex-husband becoming her roommate. She then takes us back to decades earlier when they fell in love. Let's take a look. I've sold my place up country and I'm moving in. Bags and baggage in hand. My ex-husband of 50 years announced we were going to be roommates. Unbelievable? Yes. Unavoidable? That too. Unbearable? That comes later. Why and how, you might ask, did someone find herself in a situation where she has seemingly no choice but to accept her ex-husband as a full-time housemate? Well, let me tell you about it. Once upon a time, in the land of rolling prairie plains, on a beautiful starry night under a magical harvest moon, boy meets girl, and the story begins. The local Saturday night dance was underway. Music booming through the open doors, people arriving alone in couples or groups, and everybody wearing their best go-to-town outfits. In those faraway back then days, dance halls were set with chairs around the perimeter of a huge rectangular hardwood floor. The girls sat and chatted while waiting for the next eligible fellow to come and sweep one of them off of her feet for a lively heel-toe polka, a rollicking schottische, or a dreamy cheek-to-cheek waltz. I was talking with friends when a cute, fresh-faced stranger, his twill pants tucked into a pair of worn 49er boots, asked me to dance. Hi, I'm Pat. What's your name, address, and telephone number? I wasn't very popular, and upon hearing those words I was smitten. It wasn't until our second date that he confessed his name wasn't Pat. It was Harvey. He'd utilized the safety net singles use when unsure as to whether to date someone. Wrong name, rank, and serial number. Harvey worked on the oil rigs and was what the locals called an oil boy. There was a certain romance as well as prestige in dating one. With the advent of the oil boom in Western Canada, things had changed in dusty, drowsy little farming towns. All over Saskatchewan and Alberta, dozens of oil companies were hiring young prairie farm lads who were dying to spread their wings and taste adventure. It was the first generation of girls marrying guys from other areas instead of boys from next door. So it was with me. The main conflict in Roswyn's opening narrative is that her ex-husband suddenly became her roommate. Her story is definitely suspenseful. Readers will wonder what happened that placed her in such an odd predicament. Up to this point in her story, Roswyn was in love with Harvey, so readers will wonder what went wrong with their marriage. As most readers would not want to find themselves living with an ex-spouse, they'll likely feel a bit anxious, which is tension, as they consciously or unconsciously start rooting for Roswyn. Roswyn Nelson's chapter Lonely Choices is a down-to-earth, often humorous account of the joys and trials of raising 4 kids, mostly by herself. Her account of being attacked by a lobster is certain to make you laugh, so I hope you get a chance to read Lonely Choices in Heart, Mind, Wisdom Collection number 1. This completes today's lesson. I hope you enjoyed it and feel better equipped to tell your story. It's time for your writing exercise. Okay, your exercise is write a scene or narrative that includes conflict, tension, and suspense. So step 1 is write a scene or narrative that identifies a conflict and includes tension and suspense. Note, if you've already written the beginning a paragraph for your inspirational story, you might choose to work with that narrative or scene. Step 2, examine your scene or narrative for the following. 1, what is the main conflict in your scene or narrative? 2, is there any secondary conflict? For instance, is there secondary conflict within a relationship you recounted or within you, the narrator? Remember, any inner voices that kept you locked in shame, doubt, regret, or worry are forms of internal conflict. Internal conflict could also be the main conflict in your scene or narrative. Step 3, examine the tension in your scene or narrative. What range of emotions would you like readers to experience while reading this part of your story? Ask yourself if you accomplished your goal. 4, is there sufficient suspense to draw readers into your story in a way that will make them curious enough to keep reading? If not, how might you recraft your scene or narrative to include suspense? 5, will your scene or narrative encourage readers to root for you? Remember, as the hero or heroine of your personal journey, when you triumph, it gives readers hope that they can triumph too. When you include suspense and tension, readers actually have the opportunity to root for you. Step 3, if necessary, edit your scene or narrative so that it does include sufficient conflict, tension, and suspense to cause readers to root for you. Step 4, if you'd like me, Joyce, to provide you with feed-forward editing advice on your scene or narrative, email your phone number and a copy of your prose to info@heartmindeffect.com. Okay, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave a comment below. Wishing you love and light. Stay in touch.